After viewing all 10 episodes of the video podcast series called NextGenTalks, The Future of Policing, members of NMC met with law enforcement leaders from across the country, shared their perspectives, priorities, and ideas of the generation regarding the future of policing. Tune in and see how this important conversation unfolded.
Welcome, everyone, to our special meeting between the National Gen Z and Millennial community, also known as NMC, and our law enforcement executives on the call. My name is Florence Chung. I'm the founder of Engage Public Safety. We are a nonprofit organization with a mission to engage everyday people in the public safety challenges in our cities. So today's meeting is part of a broader project called Young Americans for a Safer Community. In this meeting, we have members of NMC who are either college students or recent graduates, and they're joining from all over the country, as you can see on your screen, from urban, suburban, and rural areas, but all with the same goal. So they want to see improvements in how everyone in America experiences public safety. And as part of Young America, they want to have a voice in influencing and shaping the future of policing. So I want to say thank you to the law enforcement officials on this call for being so eager to hear from this next generation. Because it's one thing to talk about how important young people are, but it's another to walk that talk and invest your time like you're doing with us today to really listen and talk with this national group of young people. We also want to thank the National Law Enforcement Officers Memorial Fund and Museum for helping convene all of these law enforcement officials for this meeting and for supporting the project. So our goal today is to hear from Generation Z and younger millennials, their perspectives and priorities and ideas on what matters to them when it comes to the future of policing. So before we get started, NMCers, I'd like to have our law enforcement officials introduce themselves to you. So do we have Sheriff Gonzalez on?
I am on. Unfortunately, I'm troubleshooting my video feed, so I apologize for that. But if it's okay, I'll do a brief intro and while I correct that. But my name's Ed Gonzalez. I proudly serve as the Sheriff of Harris County. I manage the largest sheriff's office in the state of Texas, over 5,000 men and women, and it's a very large operation. My police career began much earlier, though, when I first joined the Houston Police Department, served for approximately 18 years there, wanted to tackle things on the public policy side. So I joined Houston City Council, where I helped lead some important reforms, such as creating some alternatives to incarceration, some opportunities to address children having opportunities to pursue education and other things. And so eventually I was able to run for sheriff. And so I'm here and I'm very excited to meet all of you. Look forward to your perspective and your leadership to see how we could do better.
Okay, my name is Chief William Balling. I'm from Sydney, Ohio, currently serving as the chief for our community. And I also serve as the Ohio Association of Chiefs of Police representative. I'd like to thank everybody on this call and everybody for doing these videos. I've watched several of them before tonight, and I've really found them helpful. This is one of the most enjoyable parts of my job, is talking with the community, talking with you and learning from you. So to keep it short, just thank you. Thank you for what you're doing. We do appreciate it.
Good evening. My name is Patrick Bonner. I am the Executive Chief Deputy at the Dallas County Sheriff's Department. I'm excited to be sitting in for Sheriff Marion Brown that could not make this call tonight. As Chief Balling said, I love working with the community, love working with the young folks. So I am excited to be on this call tonight. So I'm here for any questions.
Hello, I'm Melody Maddox, and I serve as the Sheriff of DeKalb County Sheriff Office. Been in law enforcement now for a little over 28 years. Ran for sheriff in 2014, unsuccessful, came back, ran again in 2019, and here I am. I serve over 750 plus employees. I have a 12.2 acres of land, facility, 900,000 square feet. I am called the community sheriff in my district because I am the community sheriff. I believe in working and having conversations such as this, but conversation is good, but I like to see action, and I'm the one that gets out there and get it done. So I'm honored to be here with you all and look forward to hearing getting this conversation going and hear what we can do better together. Thank you.
And hello, everybody. My name is Deputy Chief Dominic Choi, and I'm with the Los Angeles Police Department, and I oversee Office of Support Services, essentially all of our hiring and recruiting, all of our training. I oversee a $1.7 billion budget for our almost 13,000 employees. But I'm happy to be here and talk to you guys. I have a couple of kids in college, so I'm very interested to hear your perspective versus theirs, and hopefully I can give you some feedback as well. Thank you.
Oh, Chief Irwin, I think you're on mute.
I apologize for that. I knew we got a little out of order, but anyway, my name is Paul Irwin. I'm the chief of Pell City Police Department, which is in Alabama. I'm also retired from the Birmingham Police Department. I did 23 years there in patrol, and we have a very interactive community. And I did when I was in Birmingham, interacting with the community. And I'm excited about listening to the ideas in which you have. I also have children that are Generation Z. So I'm excited to be here, and thank you for this opportunity.
And Chief Shoemaker.
Sure, I missed the memo on the order, so I was just patiently waiting, full disclosure. My name is Doug Shoemaker. I'm the Chief of Police in Grand Junction, Colorado. I'm probably the smallest in the area of all the chiefs and sheriffs that are represented here. We're the largest city between Denver and Salt Lake on I-70. So the Colorado National Monument that sits behind me in the picture, the wallpaper is actually here, and it's a beautiful area to police. Been in law enforcement for a little over 31 years. Currently actually running for the 5th Vice President of the International Association of Chiefs of Police. And that comes up for election here in September. My background is in community policing. I spent most of my career in the state capital of Missouri, Jefferson City, Missouri. And I had oversight of every division through those bits of experience, but spent a lot of time in our community policing and at-risk youth units. Worked a lot with Boys and Girls Club, which is my passion. So I'm excited to be here. Like everybody else says, I too, like my cohorts, have a daughter actually that's in college, and it's always interesting to hear her perspectives. And so I'm lucky enough to hear yours tonight. So thank you for being here, and I appreciate it.
Well, welcome, chiefs and sheriffs. We're really, really glad that you're here. I know that the NMCers on this call are looking forward to this conversation. So before we jump in, lastly, I'll say this. We want to invite everyone to talk openly today. Even though this is a tough conversation and everyone knows it's a very necessary conversation, we want to all be comfortable with being uncomfortable, as they say. So we don't get this kind of opportunity often, right? We're a national group of law enforcement executives with a national group of Gen Z and young millennials. So let's really take advantage of the 90 minutes we have together. Everyone, if we can leave our cameras on, it would be great to see everyone's faces throughout the session. And with that, I will turn the mic over to an NMCer, Xavier Robertson.
Hello, everybody. Thank you for joining us today. I'm David Robertson, one of the NMCers here, and on behalf of the Gen Z and NMC community, we just want to thank all the police chiefs for coming. One of the major reasons that we came here today is to discuss the 10-part and kind of expand upon our knowledge and get a greater understanding of the 10-part series. We had conversations about defunding police, dealing with also the no man's land that is being African-American and a cop in today's world, in addition to police reformation and many, many other topics. And one of the things that we're here to talk about today is answer your questions and also answer some of the other questions that we now, from a general base, have an educated base. So it's no longer having those base understandings of police work. We have a base understanding. Now we're trying to get to those next and third levels to do what Chief Maddox said so really, really well. for us to get to those action-based solutions in all of our different communities. The NMC and Gen Z represents roughly around 50 states, and we would like to be able to take some of this knowledge that we learned here today from this talk and apply it to our own communities from here on and so forth. So without further ado, I'm gonna hand it off to some of my colleagues. Either Hassan and or Haley will be taking over from this point on. So once again, thank you for letting us come here, and I'm looking forward to learning, and just once again, thank you.
Awesome. Thank you for that, Xavier. So hello, everyone. My name is Hassan Mustafa, and I will be facilitating part of this meeting today. I'm a graduate from the University of Colorado, Denver, and I currently work within the tech industry. And I'm also calling in from Atlanta, Georgia today. Thank you to the chiefs and sheriffs and all NMC members for joining this meeting. And I want to give a special thank you to Florence and Engage Public Safety for making all of this happen. We hope that you all had a chance to review the video podcast series, as there were some really engaging conversations within there. There might have been a few moments within the podcast series where you thought, yes, I wish people would see that point. And there also might have been moments where you disagreed with what was being said. We think it's important to expose ourselves to various ways of thinking and different ideas out there for what the future of policing should look like. Everyone in this room wants some type of change for the better. And today we hope to walk away having learned something new. I ask everyone to continue to stay open-minded and engage within the conversations. Again, please do not be discouraged to speak what is on your mind. With that being said, we watched the episodes and we have some NMCers that want to share their learnings and key takeaways with you. And each NMCer will now just take a couple of minutes to share their perspectives and overall thoughts. First up, we're going to have Maya Jacobs share her thoughts.
Hi, everyone. As my partner in NMC crime, Hassan, just described, I am Maya Jacobs, and I am an HBCU alum. I work in marketing and PR at a minority-owned company based out of New Orleans, which is where I'm also patching into you guys. As a member of the steering committee that's been a part of this project since our very first law enforcement meeting back in 2020, it has been a unique, one-of-a-kind, stand on its own powerful experience. And it's all really coming full circle, which is just so awesome to see. And I want to thank everybody from our EPS team to our NMCers to our National Law Enforcement Memorial Fund partner for being a part of that, because it's just really blessed me in so many ways. In digesting the final product of our videocast series, all the complexities, the nuances of having so many entities and voices just come together, what really struck me the most was this unifying underlying chord and element that weave through every single topic, like Xavier said, from being Black and blue to what about our allies to can we actually change? And that one element was humanity. Thankful to Webster Dictionary for defining humanity as the quality of being compassionate, sympathetic, or generous in behavior or disposition, or more simply, the quality and state of being human. What I noticed about this theme was that all of us, which was upsetting, unsurprising, and a little bit confusing, but still inspiring, every single person from a Gen Zer to a law enforcement official to an advocacy official was coming from the perception that their quality of being human is fundamentally threatened by the current state of law enforcement in this country. And to our law enforcement officials, I've heard and I want to affirm on this call your right to be human and not be dehumanized by the profession that you're a part of. And with that, I encourage you to use your experiences to have increased compassion for the communities and people that have historically been dehumanized by the profession that you're a part of. And I invite you to be generous in giving of yourselves in this conversation and conversations after this as being a part of the community and not being apart from it. In the episode that I had the honor to be a part of, episode 9, Double Standard, Next Gen Take on the Capitol Riots, I think our biggest critique came in at if there's a public tragedy and you exclude yourselves from the public discussion of it, then you've excluded yourselves from the public. And in the spirit of humanity, I want to say that no one is expecting perfection, although with great responsibility, great power comes great responsibility. But what we do expect is participation. So as we continue the great work we started here with having awesome participation in these conversations, I just want to gift everyone with this quote. Let your conversations be always full of grace, seasoned with salt, so that you may know how to answer everyone. Colossians chapter 4, verse 6 translation. So thank you, and I'll pass it over to my next NMCer.
Awesome. Thank you for that response, Maya. Next up, we're going to have Clayton Cunningham.
Hello. Sorry for not having my camera on. I live in the middle of nowhere, so the internet's not so good. But anyway, my name is Clayton Cunningham. I study economics and chemistry at Eastern Oregon University, calling in from LeGrand, Oregon. So between all 10 of the podcasts, what inspired me the most was the homogeneity between each of the conversation guests regarding the ultimate goal of the future of policing. Across the board, each and every one of our guests acknowledge problems in policing, politics, or society that are contributing to our current circumstances with the institution of policing in the US today. It was easy to see that each and every one of them stressed safer communities and better policing as the primary goal moving forward. I found it profound that differences in opinion arose only in discussing the source of and solutions to the outlined problems. My hope after hearing all of these podcasts and after being in this meeting today is that before we all post that tweet, make that comment, or have that discussion, everyone here and anyone who listens to our podcasts after our meeting today will take a second to remember and keep in mind the universal areas of agreement. Because conversations like the ones in our podcast series, where two opposing viewpoints on a sensitive topic can be discussed openly and with civility, are crucial to developing effective and efficient solutions to societal problems. To summarize my main takeaway from this podcast series, I also have a quote, but from one of what I view as one of the greatest intellectual thinkers of all time, John Stuart Mill, from a book he wrote in 1859 called On Liberty. Just as a side note, as with any reading from historic time periods, replace the pronoun he with whichever pronoun you see fit. So from On Liberty, published in 1859, Mill, speaking on the importance of understanding other points of view, says, "He who knows only his own side of the case knows little of that. His reasons may be good, and no one may have been able to refute them. But if he is equally unable to refute the reasons on the opposite side, if he does not so much as know what they are, he has no ground for preferring either option. The rational position for him would be suspension of judgment, and unless he contents himself with that, he is either led by authority or adopts, like the generality of the world, the side to which he feels most inclined. Nor is it enough that he should hear the arguments of adversaries from his own teachers, presented as they state them and accompanied by what they offer as refutations. He must be able to hear them from persons who actually believe them, who defend them in earnest and do their very utmost for them. He must know them in their most plausible and persuasive form."
All right. Thank you for that response, Clayton. Next up, we are going to have Betsy Garcia.
I don't know how to follow up after that. Clayton just wow, it just blew me away. Thanks, Clayton. So hello, everyone. My name is Betsy, and I'm based in Oxnard, California. I'm a graduate of California State University, Northridge, so not that far away from Deputy Chief Choi, actually. And I am currently working in social media production and management. So I'm really excited to join you all in this conversation, and apologies if you see me looking down. I have some notes here, didn't want to lose track. But if you hadn't had an opportunity to watch the podcast or listen to it on Spotify, you should. It's a really interesting conversation. There was a lot of key points, there's a lot of perspectives and a lot of viewpoints I hadn't previously considered. Now, I've shared this story with a couple NMC members on our trips and in conversations, but I'm going to share the story again. And before I decided on my major in college, I was actually considering going into law enforcement, and specifically was thinking about going into the FBI Academy to train to be an analyst for cybercrime. I had gotten as far as actually having an information session scheduled with the recruiter for the FBI. And I did not know the FBI had a field office in my hometown. right above a dentist. Like, who knew? But I had an information session there with a recruiter, and we had a great conversation. She told me about the role, she told me a lot of things, but then she asked me, why do you want to go into law enforcement? And at the time I said I wanted to make a difference and to help people. And she laughed. And then she told me that law enforcement wasn't a profession of change. It's about standards, rules, politics, dealing with the worst of humanity, and that I should probably pick another profession. And so I did. I never forgot those words. And so once again, I had an opportunity to be a part of a project that deals with law enforcement. And I find those words of law enforcement being unwilling to change to be a lie. Given all that has happened since I graduated in 2019, I've had to live through historic moments, for better or for worse. These are the times that my grandkids are going to ask me about in 20, 30 years. And so I better do something remarkable during these times. Change is possible when we all utilize our individual talents and bring positivity into the world. We don't all have to be extraordinary people, but ordinary people are able to bring about the most change in their local communities. This is the lesson I have learned from all these conversations. This is the lesson that I have heard throughout each and every episode of the podcast. And so I hope this conversation can be a start into going into a path of positive change. You cannot change what you don't know, as Dominique Johnson from episode 7, I believe, said. So I encourage community members and law enforcement to come into this conversation with questions. We all have an opportunity to learn from each other, and I hope that this could be the start of something more. Thank you, everyone, and I'll throw it back to Hassan.
Awesome. Thank you for that, Betsy. Next up, we are going to have Ann Pearson.
Thank you, Hassan, and thank you to everyone who's on this call. I'm currently a student at Bellarmine University. I'm a junior studying psychology, political science, and criminal justice. And I'm calling in from Louisville, Kentucky, which has been my home since I was 9 months old, even though it doesn't sound like it sometimes. But of course, aside from being my home for anyone in policing and anyone who's even looked at the news in the last year, Louisville was also the place that Breonna Taylor died and became an epicenter of the protests over the past year. And it has been rough as somebody living in the city because it feels like there hasn't been communication and there hasn't been a willingness to change. And so when I was offered the opportunity to become part of this blog series, I immediately jumped on it because we need more conversations like that. And I think the one thing that stood out to me the most from our blog series was the fact that every single person on every call said that change needed to happen and soon. Now, they disagreed on how much change or what change or where it should come from, but there was certainly agreement there, as Clayton pointed out. And I think that that is the most important part of what we're doing here today, is joining together to actually start figuring out what can change soon. I was also shocked, though, by some of the comments that were made talking about accountability within policing and how a lot of police chiefs and people at the top don't have the power to exactly take over and hold their workers accountable in the ways that they may sometimes want to. So there's certainly a lot of progress to go. But I think the biggest thing for our generation is to see genuineness in willingness to change. This comes up on almost every call where we're asked about Black Lives Matter and advertising, is we can tell when people are saying they want to change, but aren't really. And that is very true in Louisville. Over the summer, we had a few of our mayors and people like that speaking out and saying that they wanted equality, they wanted justice. But at the same time, people who were going and joining what were 99% of the time peaceful protests were being met with riot gear. So we can see when there are discrepancies, and that's why we're so eager to have these conversations now, to encourage you to work together and actually bring about genuine change. And I'm sure that the things we'll have to say in the next hour are going to be really influential and meaningful for you. So thank you for joining us. And I didn't get the memo we were adding quotes to everything, so I don't have a quote to end.
I think that's perfectly fine. I don't think that was planned at all. Alrighty, next up, we're going to have Xavier give his comments.
Hello once again. Not only did I watch all of the I'm muted? I'm muted. Okay. Not only did I watch all of the episodes, I was actually the one who put them together, and actually seeing all the comments, all the conversations that were had. One of the overall themes is the claim and just missions to is that the system is broken, and how much we need to fix it varies on from viewpoint to viewpoint. But as people who want to see change happen, as an African American man who wants to make sure that his kids aren't scared of the people who are supposed to protect them, I believe that conversations like this are not the solution. This is not the end goal. This is the start to plant seeds in every single one of our communities. And I need not only the NMCers, but the police chiefs to hear me very, very well, because we cannot, as I've learned with working with Florence over the last couple of years, the last year, we cannot do this on our own. And we need to meet at the middle in order to make a better, safer community for everyone. Because no one wants to be a George Floyd, no one wants to be a Breonna Taylor, but more importantly, we don't want to see our friends become those people. You know, someone like me, and some of us, and most of us like us, you can see our friends are from multiple different generations, multiple different cultures, and we want to make sure that everyone has a fair say if they were to get pulled over or meet the police. And my biggest challenge to not only the people on this call, but the people who you will talk to, is that we take this conversation, come up with solutions that we could take to our own backyards. Because as much as we want to change things federally, the police chiefs know this all too well. It doesn't work that way, but I just killed it. But what I was saying before I bring it to a close was that ultimately we want to ensure that our team here, the people who leave this call, leave with some actionable steps. We've been talking about theory for these last 10 podcasts, and it's beyond that. We got to go ahead and make sure that we take those steps. We come with concrete goals, and we work with our communities, activists, as well as our police chiefs to get to the next step. So thank you once again, and I'm gonna hand it back to Hassan.
Thank you for that great response, Xavier. Also, please, if you didn't have the opportunity to watch those videos, please go back and watch it. Xavier did a great job at editing those, so please make sure to check them out. And next up, we are going to have Victoria Hicks.
Hi, everyone. I'm a senior at College of Charleston in South Carolina, but I'm tuning in from Greenville. And I would just like to mention that I was actually able to host one of the conversations, and it was really, really impactful for me personally. But watching all of the other ones, and nearly every conversation mentioned George Floyd, which was expected. And, you know, he's already been mentioned several times on this call. But one of the things that, because George Floyd, the way in which he died was very, it triggered global outrage, but there was, in addition to the outrage, there was also global expressions of support. And, you know, now we're like 10 or so months later, and his trial is going on, and there's not the same level of support, even though people are still struggling. And I've been thinking about a lot, and as we near, you know, eventually we're going to get a verdict, and either way, there's going to be a response, whether it's positive or negative. And so I just think that it's really crucial that everybody, you know, take this seriously, and to, like, even for the sheriffs, I really do encourage you all to ask us questions and to tell us how we can best support you all, because we have no idea what's going to happen after this verdict comes out. But also, no matter what the response is, that's going to bring conversations like these back to the forefront. And I think that the more prepared we are for those conversations, the more we can really utilize that momentum.
All right. Awesome. Thank you for that, Victoria. And before we do close out, do we have any other NMCers that would like to give their comment on the podcast series? Feel free to unmute now if you would like to. All right. Sounds good then. I will go ahead and hand it off to Haley now.
Awesome. Thanks, Hassan. Hi, everyone. My name is Haley Lozzi Reyes, and I'm a graduate of the University of Nevada, Las Vegas. And now I work at an aquarium, and I'm calling in from Salt Lake City, Utah, and I'll be moderating the next segment. So we just heard from several NMCers about their reaction to the video podcast series. And now we want to open it up to the rest of NMC that's here joining this call. And we want to have an open discussion and hear from you and invite you to unmute yourself and jump in. And you can also write a comment in the chat, but we'll start off like with a single question to kind of spark some conversation. We would like to know like what's one thing you think is the top issue in policing that needs to be fixed, and what would you like to see in terms of solutions? So just pop in.
Just one thing.
If you have more, like we'll hear it.
Well, I'll jump in. I'm Ed Gonzalez. I'm the Harris County Sheriff. I think that people really want to see change. I think that for far too often they've heard us in policing circles say, yes, we want to reform. We understand that we need to make some changes, especially years ago after the 21st century policing model came out. But there was really no tangible changes. There were some here and there, but nothing, that really took foot across the nation. And so I think that people really want to see change, not just hear that we're listening and that we want to change. So we see far too often too many incidents between especially Black males and police officers or deputies become increasingly violent, and many times it ends up in death for the individual. Now, we have to look at the broader picture and understand that the vast majority, thankfully, of situations go well, but it's that small percentage that's going to obviously capture all the attention. And so we really have a lot to do. I think training, historically, we always get trained on anticipating that what could be a threat to us, hands in pocket, shiny objects, those type of things. And I think we have to think, train more broader than that. I think that we need to really look at de-escalation. We're embarking on an effort that I'm really proud of, where we're not just putting it into policy, a duty to intervene, but also going to follow up with the ABLE program that's being led through Georgetown Law that I think is excellent, but there's other models about how do you go about teaching that, because so often in our profession, it's about respect. It's about, well, that's a senior officer. Oh, that's my trainer. Oh, that's, I'm the new person. I'm not going to say anything. And that's the wrong culture to have. So that's a cultural thing. It doesn't matter what you have in policy if you're not following up with training on how to intervene, how to do it properly, what's expected of you. We can't just say, check the box and say, okay, we're doing duty to intervene, we're now a leading agency. No, that's not good enough. And I think that fundamentally, though, I think that we have to be willing to understand that we need to do some more soul searching, that we need to know the history of policing in our country. And I'm as pro-American and pro-police as they come, but it doesn't negate the fact that I can still learn about the history and know that, especially in Black America, it wasn't a good history. And that's trickled down to current generations. And so we have to be willing to teach that in our academies, and we don't. And if one of my colleagues on the call here knows of one that's doing it already, please let me know, because I know we're not even doing it. We want to start doing that, but it's important to know the history. It's important to know, and it's also important for us to say what's wrong, is right is right. We should be able to call it like we see it. And if somebody messed up, I'm sorry, but you need to be held accountable. There can't be this thin blue line of protection that often gets misconstrued. I think it's important to support law enforcement. We could support one another, but we could still call out police brutality. And I could be strong on law enforcement, strong in rule of law, but I could also be strong in speaking against police brutality. It doesn't have to be one or the other. And I think that, I threw several things out there. That's why I could just say one, I'm sorry, but just to kind of tee things off, that's a few things on my mind.
If I can.
Awesome, thank you. Oh, no, Hannah, go for it. Please speak on it.
Okay. So I just wanted to cut in and say, I totally agree that we need to understand the history of policing. A lot of us know, some people may not, but like police are the original bounty hunters, the ones who returned the runaway slaves back to their owners. So you have that history, and then you have the history of the civil rights movement with the violence between them and people in the African-American community. We're trying to fight for basic human rights just as we are now. And so I think seeing that history, and as we're moving towards the future, I think we need to look at, like you said, there's a lot of things that need to be fixed. You're like just one, and it's like, yeah, it's a lot. We look at police culture, we look at police policy, we look at police standards and police practices, and all of it has to do with police. Like that's the root word, and it's the foundation that I'm looking at. And I see like when we add the new trainings, like you said, that we need more trainings and more like de-escalation, implicit bias, and all that type of stuff. I feel like we're not aiming to rebuild the foundation. We're just attempting to change the design of policing. And I think with something that has such a foundation of inequality and violence, especially towards a marginalized group of people, I think that we honestly need to look at the foundation of it, the beginning of it. I think that that's something that needs to be changed, because if we continue to sit here and just add on more training or add on more policies and just try to twist it and turn it around so that we can hope it can lead us to a different future, at the end of the day, the base is still the same. And I don't think we're going to get that. Things are going to continue to reoccur, and they're going to continue to happen if we don't really change the base. So I think we need to look at something as a new solution, maybe change completely the foundation of policing. We can even give it a different name if we need to, like maybe not call it policing, maybe give it a new and innovative name with new training and new standards, something completely at the bottom where we build on top of that towards the future and aim towards a more proactive and progressive future. Because I just see it as right now we're tweaking it, but I think we can't continue to tweak stuff. We need to actually rebuild and regroup and reanalyze and find our way back towards something that will actually get us into a better future.
So this is Chief Bonner. Can I make a quick comment on Hannah? So Hannah, when you talk about the foundation and you're talking about reworking training, a couple of things that we're doing here at the Dallas Sheriff's Department, our thoughts are, if you're going to have police training police, you will get the same thing. So we are currently working with community advocates to come in and teach the implicit bias. We're at the end of our Deputies Academy now, we're bringing in members of the community to talk about, some of the things that we're talking about here, how people feel when they're pulled over on traffic stops, or how people are afraid for their African-American sons to be pulled over. So, I think one of the things that's going to be very important in law enforcement is for police to always train police, because you're going to get the same outcome. So I think that was a very important statement that you made.
Anne said she wanted to add to that too.
Yeah, let's hear from a few of our millennials and Gen Zers about what they think is the biggest issue and some solutions they would see to these problems.
I kind of wanted to respond to what Sheriff Gonzalez and Hanan said specifically about training. And just to give you a bit of background, I've been working on a project looking at policing and mental illness very specifically across the country and then in my own community, and the problems with implicit bias about specifically, again, mental illness, but it does expand to other things. And I think the thing that we found over and over again is that sometimes those trainings aren't enough. Being aware of implicit bias is a great start, but it doesn't stop you from having implicit bias. Yeah. And I think one thing that I've learned from working on this project is, police have been stuck in this situation where you guys are dealing with so many things beyond what was originally in your realm, with mental illness, with homelessness, and almost, as somebody in one of our episodes said, become a dumping ground for social issues that we don't want to deal with. But it might be a start to actually, instead of hiring people who want to be police, to start looking at people in other professions like social workers, like psychologists, who, while they never imagined actually working on the police force, might make very valuable additions to your teams. Places have started doing this with crisis intervention teams where they hire a psychologist to go out with the police. But it might be a great way to start diversifying your fields and getting away from implicit bias and just adding more and more things to training for police who shouldn't be dealing with the issue in the first place. Now, I don't know much about the logistics of that. I'm sure Deputy Chief Choi has an opinion, but I just wanted to put that out there.
Thank you.
I can just chime in a little bit. Oh, sorry, James, go ahead.
No, go ahead.
Well, so, in Los Angeles here, and going back to Sheriff Gonzalez's comment about the history, and then I'll go into the mental illness, and we call it a co-response model. But so first, regarding the history, what we've done in our academies is our recruits start off the academy with what we call days of dialogue, where we've invited, it's a facilitated type of discussion with our new recruits when they start the academy and throughout the academy to speak with community members about these tough issues. And it's facilitated so as soon as they're done with the academy and day one of hitting the streets, they've already learned how to interact with the communities and handle the tougher questions and have a little more insight. And then on the history perspective of that, we have discussions in the academy, not only about LAPD history, about all the good things or the rah-rah things that we've done. We're now talking about the conflicts we've had with various communities, what caused those conflicts, and how we've addressed or come out of those conflicts and what we've learned from them. From the riots to the Rodney King incident and so on and so forth, and even to our after action reports that we're putting together for the most recent, we call it the Safer LA protests. We have 21 geographic areas. All of them have been asked, and they're all run by captains, and they've all been asked to put together a history book, and not the history about all the positive things that have happened, but all the traditional conflicts and things that have been critical incidents within those commands. So when a new officer comes to that command for the first day and they have orientation, they're learning about those conflicts. So when they interact with the community, they're sensitive to why I just did a traffic stop. Why is this person so upset at me? They have a better understanding of where that person is coming from, and hopefully that'll change the interaction, have more understanding, have more trust, and quite frankly, just give the officer a perspective that officer didn't have about that community. So that's what we're doing for the historical perspective in our training. As far as dealing with mental illness, and I was also our department-wide homeless coordinator for 2 years. Quite a challenge here in Los Angeles as in other places across the nation. But one of the things that we've done is with our homeless service providers, we call Los Angeles Homeless Services Authority. We had a co-response model where we would go to homeless encampments, and obviously we'd go there and make sure it was safe. Then our outreach providers would come out there and interact with those homeless individuals to see if they wanted services. So we did that with the homeless. We also do that co-response model with persons experiencing mental illness. And we are now at a point where our dispatch, when somebody calls the police, the dispatcher knows to ask a series of questions to determine whether this person is armed or not armed. And then that call is diverted to what we call our Didi Hirsch hotline. They are clinicians that can vet that call, talk to somebody, and they can determine, they will send a unit out there that is a professional to deal with this person. And then they'll call the police if they can't handle it or because it becomes violent. We also have what we call our, the mental evaluation unit. We have officers that'll co-respond with a clinician and an officer together in the field. Now I get it, we have the luxury of having a lot of cops, although that number is going down quickly, but and so we're able to do that working with the city and the county to partner to do that. But those are some of the things we're trying to do in pilot to see if we have better outcomes when we interact with people with mental illness or other social issues such as homelessness, where quite frankly the cops don't have the solution. So it's challenging to put us on the front lines with the expectation that we're going to solve that problem. We don't have resources for housing somebody or providing somebody food or anything like that. So those are just my comments to everyone's discussion.
That's awesome. I'm loving this conversation. Let's have James, Jacob, and Maya go before we move on to our next one, because we still have a lot of things we want to talk about still.
Yeah, thank you for that, Haley. Something, not to pivot away, actually kind of ties right into what Deputy Chief Troy was saying, but something you said, Ann, that really made an impact on me, and it kind of tied in exactly to what Chief Gonzalez was saying is, maybe we should look more and in some of the episodes and some of the people that talk here have alluded to the fact that there's a culture problem, right? It's when some of the practices and how things are handled. And you like almost barely said it, but kind of like maybe we should go into hiring people like Garcia, who rather than look at becoming a police and trying to enforce laws, who want to make a positive difference. And that might be the cultural shift that is needed. But and building on that, what Chief Gonzalez had said, he mentioned how, if somebody does something wrong, his specific words were, sorry, you were in the wrong there. And it was really poignant to me in Clayton's episode when he sat down with Chief Kaufman, and they talked about how being a police should not be a community on its own. Police should be synonymous with the community that they work in. And so I see that as one of the major problems. That was the original question Harry had asked, is that the culture needs to shift as much to where police are more synonymous with the economy or the community which they serve, rather than them being their own community.
So I guess I'll talk now. My name is Jacob Keller. I go to Brandeis University in Waltham, Massachusetts. I'm a junior. I'm studying business and sociology. I hosted episode 8, which is called "Is There an Us versus Them? Understanding Police Culture." And the thing that stood out to me the most was talking about mental health when it comes to police officers. One of the panelists was a part of the CIA, and then he joined the Savannah Police Department. And he mentioned that one of his coworkers was shot, and that made me think about how police officers are constantly alert, hyper vigilant, thinking about the threats that come to them, because the threats can come to them and sometimes do come to them. And combined with the clinical psychologist that was on the panel, it sounded like a lot of police officers are under a lot of mental strain, and there isn't enough being done to address the mental health issues that police officers face. So I think addressing that is really important. One solution that was mentioned was maybe a wellness check once a year, not in an evaluation way of, is this person fit for our police department, but in a constructive way of, is this person doing all right? Do they need support? And along with that, there were conflicting messages of, oh, my command structure is really focusing on mental health in officers versus I've worked with police departments and no one's considering mental health. I think it's really, really important to consider the mental health of officers, and for leaders to demonstrate to their officers that they might face mental health problems, that they face them, rather than saying, oh, I see the value of mental health services, but not for me. I'm strong. I'm just going to stick through it. I'm going to power through it. To demonstrate that each person has vulnerabilities, and seeking out help is the way to surpass the vulnerabilities and become a stronger person. So that's kind of what I was really thinking about.
I definitely agree with that sentiment, Jacob, for sure. And you got some love in the comment section with people who are like, yeah, I think mental health is something that, even though I feel like it's championed by millennials, Gen Z, and it was really brought to the forefront in this generation, it's something that's resonating across the board, because you get back to that underlying tone of humanity. And it's just like, if your mental isn't together, it's so hard to be human. I think what I really wanted to comment on was implicit bias training. But overall, one of my things that I've noticed watching all the episodes and having this new look at policing is that as an industry, as a profession, it's in a box, and it's like a very tight box. And I think implicit bias training has become another box, in a sense, where it's like, they have it, it's in place, but there's nothing pushing the envelope on it. It's like, okay, we'll push people through this training. And from our episode, I think it was episode 1, where we had the expert coming back and saying there's very little, metrics and evidence that's showing that implicit bias training is doing a lot. And when he spoke on how hard it is to train somebody out of their cognitive process of being implicitly biased, I was like, that actually makes a lot of sense. Because we all have implicit biases. It's not even just a police thing. Like, I have implicit biases. We all do, off of our upbringing, and our surroundings. And I think with the solution, Sheriff Gonzalez mentioned, like, if you can know about anybody in episode 9, and I guess I'm pivoting, like, oh, y'all should go watch episode 9. But the young man I interviewed, Jared Holt, he actually knows of an organization that's capitalizing off of some of the work that Deputy Chief Choi is doing in LA, where they're going over the history of policing, which pivots me right back to episode 7 with Victoria, which, isn't it awesome that our episodes are like not super playing together, but they all really hit on each other? Like, that just kept blowing my mind. But Dominique was like, people want to change things, but they don't really have an idea of what they're changing.
Yeah.
And I think that's super internal when it comes to how we think about the mechanism of law enforcement, because there are so many law enforcement officers that don't understand and don't get training and don't pay homage to the history of policing in America and the history of what's happening in our communities. And there was a specific training, and I guess this goes back into the box. I think implicit training doesn't really work, but when you have a training about history of racism and the history of racial tension in a country, that's something that's going to renew and refresh somebody's mind and disrupt an implicit bias, because it's new information and it's new conditioning. And I feel like that's just so much more impactful than this concept of implicit bias training, where we're like, is that watered down, don't be racist training? Like, what is implicit bias training? And I think even after watching our episodes, I'm still not like, oh yeah, I know what implicit bias training is. I'm like, yeah, what is implicit bias training? So I think that's one thing. And then going back into the box, and James hit on it, and I think we're always hitting on in these conversations about what law enforcement isn't equipped to do. And I'm just like, why is the title of a police officer so rigid, and who you're able to hire and recruit at a department so rigid that you can't bring in specialists, that you can't, like somebody like Betsy, who's like, I'm here to help, and her way of helping might have been go and get her bachelor's in counseling and doing X, Y, Z and the other. Why is it to where, as a structure, as a company, police departments can't be innovative in saying, okay, we're going to bring so-and-so on board, and they might not be, a beat cop, they might not be doing this, that, and the other, but they're specifically going to be here for aggravated or not domestic abuse charges, calls where they'll go and de-escalate a situation. And in the conversations, I was always waiting for there to be more collaboration and more innovation about how we think about policing, think about police departments, think about police department roles and what different people can be hired for it. And it just never gets there. And I've always kind of wondered about that, because outside of policing, if you look at any other industry, any other company, it's like, oh, social media is becoming a thing. We're going to start a social media department and have, social media interns or have a social media strategist. And I guess I was kind of wanting insight about how, of course, that's definitely not the approach that's taking in policing. It's never like, oh, mental health is becoming a thing. Now we have to kind of outsource versus hiring within internally and distributing these typical roles we see into these new arenas. And the reason I really asked that, and I guess maybe I should wait for some responses, but my main reason in asking that is, in this conversation, we've heard from a lot of our experts outside of law enforcement that they see the future of law enforcement being a reduction, like some type of reduction, especially in number of employees. And I'm like, okay, reduction, but what if that reduction also got transmuted into that, okay, we do need more health specialists. So not necessarily a reduction, people can still come into this profession, but they're not necessarily doing the typical role that we always see an entry level or somebody entering the academy doing, if that makes sense. I hope that makes sense.
It makes sense. Love your hot takes.
Yeah, this has been some really awesome conversation. So we can extend this part of the conversation for maybe like another 5 minutes. If you want to hear from any other NMCers who've gotten any ideas, hearing what our peers have had to say.
And let me say this.
Something. Oh, go ahead. Go ahead.
I'm sorry. Sheriff Maddox.
Actually, Sheriff Maddox, is it all right if we just hear from an NMC really quick? We're definitely going to get to some law enforcement perspectives. Awesome. Thank you.
Okay, well, I don't know if this is like the biggest problem in every state, but I know for sure it's a big problem in my state of South Carolina that we have had in the past 5 years, like so many police chiefs that have had to step down for like really embarrassing reasons. And that's why we have to keep having these runoff elections. And so every time that comes up, there's this conversation about having a nationwide database for police officers, and there's never any headway made on that. So I guess I'm just wondering, like if we were to push for that, like what body would even be over it? Like who would we be contacting, or like what's the best way to even go about having contact between multiple police departments? How would something like that be established?
Awesome. Thank you, Victoria. I think we can probably toss this back over to Florence, who will introduce us to some reactions from our law enforcement officials here.
Well, thanks, Haley. So, we asked the NMCers, for your thoughts on what the main issues in your mind are when it comes to policing and the various solutions. Heard a lot about mental health and the mental wellness of officers, amongst other things. But now we want to move it over to our law enforcement officials on the call. There are 7 of you here. We'd love to hear your reactions specifically to what you heard from NMCers. We know that there are a lot of different things that your departments are doing to address some of these things that NMCers have brought up, and we're seeing it in the chat. If you could continue to put some of those things in the chat, that would be great. So everyone can go to the chat and see what various departments are doing in terms of solutions. But for this segment, just for the next 10 minutes, we'd love to hear from you, chiefs and sheriffs, your gut reactions and your thoughtful reactions to what you just heard NMC share. And I'd like to start with Chief Shoemaker out of Colorado.
I made first on this list. This is exciting. Well, first and foremost, it's good to hear your honesty and your perception, because if you don't have honest conversations, my perceptions may be very different than yours. I think, Betsy, I'm making notes as I listen, and your FBI recruiter that says this is not a profession to help people. Can I just say on behalf of all of law enforcement, that is so far wrong. That person never spent a day on the street, apparently, to really interact with people to make a difference, because in my 31 plus years, I can tell you that I've been able to do that every single day in some way, shape, or form. So on behalf of our profession, wow, that's just, I've never heard that before. So I'm still in shock, at full admission. And Jacob, you mentioned wellness and mental health, and I appreciate that because it is difficult. And I know in the chat, there's been some things mentioned about wellness and peer support. And I guess may I ask a question, Florence? Am I allowed to do that? Okay, cool. I like to know the rules. So I guess my question to each of you is, given the narrative in policing and everything that's been brought up, how would you help us encourage people to even want to join this profession at this point? Because the scrutiny for police is so much higher, I think, than any other profession. How do we sell that to people? And I say that because I really would like to hear some of your comments, or we can chat separately on it too. But I'm just curious as to who would want to do it, given all this pressure, because it's a lot of pressure, right? But who would want to do it and put themselves in the spotlight potentially? Because if they do make a wrong move, are they ostracized, or do they face something? And I'm not talking intentional acts. We're not talking about the bad cops that need to go to prison. I'm not talking about them. I'm talking about the people that, have an interest in law enforcement that just want to really help the communities and do some good things. So I'll stop talking there and type some stuff in chat.
Yeah. Does anybody want to respond to Chief Shoemaker's question? How do we get more?
I can.
Oh, you can go.
I can, for sure. I think one thing that what a lot of cops or a lot of people who would want to be cops are scared of is, one, obviously the backlash, but two, there seems to be a lack of transparency and a lack of accountability across the board from all different police platforms. I do have friends who are cops, and of course they said the George Floyd things were wrong. However, there was always a yeah, but, and sometimes we want to make sure that there's accountability, and then the people who are closest to us, our police department, is actually working to prevent these things that happen. And one thing that kind of, I think, nationwide, a lot of people lost a lot of trust was, we have George Floyd here, we have Breonna Taylor here, we have Rashad Brooks here, and they're all different regions of the United States. And there was a sense of like, there's a lack of accountability, and all the police chiefs are saying, it's not us, because that's a technically different department, but it's still part of your culture. And one thing that we would like to see is there's an accountability and there's a transparency of what you guys are trying to do. A lot of times we don't really know what the police is really doing in our community to really make it happen. And just letting people know what's really happening. And you guys are having a consistent effort. And it's not just a PR stunt. It's not just because George Floyd happened to die, the police is doing this in response. We like to see long-term change and know about it so we can be involved in that part. So there's I guess an act for permission for us to be a part of the process, as well as some transparency and accountability. Therefore, you can deconstruct the narrative that what police is, at least in your community, and then you can get those people like Betsy who want to help and create change and create that opportunity for that change to happen. Because right now, I can't speak for all police departments, but that lack of transparency and the lack of accountability, especially of summer 2020, has led a bad taste of a lot of people's mouths about policing, myself included, until I got educated and then realized how some of the stuff function. There still seems to be a lack of accountability, generally speaking. And if people just own up to some things are wrong, I think that would go a long way.
If I can piggyback off of that, I think that was definitely a very good insight into our viewpoint on it. But I also believe that as someone who was looking into law enforcement, I had previously wanted to be a U.S. Marshal, and was looking to be a part of the solution, looking to help people through the system. But then I'm a criminal justice major, so going through my classes, I've been oh, I just see all this stuff piling up in the system and seeing the history of the inequalities, and that's what made me step away. And plus the things that are happening now to people who look like me, people who walk around like me every single day, it just makes me step away from the system. So I think if you're trying to reach out and you're trying to get more people from our generation and even the younger generation to join, I think we need to see more cops being part of the solution. Nowadays, it's not enough to just be not a bad cop. It's not enough to just be not racist. You need to be anti-racist. You need to be anti the problem. You need to be someone who is helping towards the solution, someone who is in the community and building a relationship with the community, with the kids, with the adults too, with people in poverty, all of that. I think we need to see cops as being a part of the solution and not just not being a part of the problem, because someone in the background, someone who's silent, someone who's not necessarily speaking up against it, I think especially coming from our generation, that's no longer enough. It's no longer good enough for it to pass and us still support and still want to be a part of law enforcement. So I think we definitely need to see a jump and a reach towards being a part of the solution and more towards a rebuilding and establishing that relationship with the community, because I think that we need to see more advances towards solutions and not just being comfortable with being not a problem.
Thank you, Hannah. Betsy?
So I want to thank everyone for calling me out on that, on the FBI thing. Yeah, so I still think I would, if given the opportunity, I would like to join law enforcement. What that would look like, who knows? Originally, I wanted to be an analyst for cybercrime, take down white collar crime, that sort of thing. Don't know if that's still an option. Don't know what's in the cards for me in this future. It's been one of those crazy few years. But I think with piggybacking off of what everyone has said, I think one of the sources, and check out episode 2 with Clayton, but also Chief Kaufman from Redondo Beach. He made a good case for his department. They are a proactive force. They are a proactive community department. They don't wait for situations to happen. They are actively trying to engage, because the contact we have with police shouldn't be when worst case scenario, with worst thing, when someone's getting arrested. It should always be a familiar presence. It should always be a community presence. We should be out. Police should always be an active part of their community. So I think one of the things, and I kind of mentioned it in the chat, one of the things I think that the future of policing is going to look like, instead of being a reactive force, it's going to be a proactive force and a proactive part of each of our local communities. I know it's 18,000 departments. I don't know how you guys do it. I don't even know how you guys like communicate with one another, if you do, but we all have an opportunity to try to bring this change to our own communities, try to be partners with our own communities. We know what's best in our communities. We know what happens. We know where our favorite spots are. We know where our kids go to school. So I think it's just taking that extra step, because just not being racist or not saying anything isn't sufficient. Nowadays, it's all online. We will be looking for the receipts. So I think it's important for everyone to be proactive, to say that when this happened, our department did this. When this occurred, we did this. We reacted and we did our best. So I think that's one of the takeaways that I want folks to take away from this conversation. Sorry, just went out a little.
James from
And
Ohio.
I just want to add one last thing. It's going to be really quick. Chief Shoemaker, I think another thing to look at is the pipeline, the recruitment pipeline. We had this same conversation when we were talking to execs about hiring Black talent in corporate America. And we just had to call out the flat out lie of like, there are no diverse recruits. We were like, no. We are getting stories of Black people filling out 80 applications a day for jobs and not getting hired. It is not that there is not a pool. It's just we have to look at our recruitment pipelines and see why aren't we recruiting people. More specific to law enforcement, NYPD, we had a sheriff, I forgot her name, I'm sorry, you guys, but she went in and looked at one of her recruiters because they were like, why are we getting all these applications from diverse candidates and like we're still not ending up with a good pool? And then they go to the recruiters and they're seeing that they're knocking people out of the process for very minimal, very minor things. And overall, I think we spoke about this with Booker, and he was just mentioning like there are just some things that shouldn't disqualify somebody from being able to be a part of law enforcement that currently are. So I think that's also an area where you have to kind of look at what's impeding people from getting in that do want to be a part of this but also that goes hand in hand with generating interest. It's like, but what interest is already there and why isn't it making it into the doors? Because that's also a pretty big issue kind of across the board with any type of recruitment situation, especially for good, diverse candidates.
Thank you, Maya. I want to read a comment from Kylie in Gainesville. Kylie, if you want to share your comment, I think it's important. Do you want to?
Hi, it's Keely. About my friend who wanted to join law enforcement. Yeah, it's actually my boyfriend studied 4 years of criminal justice and homeland security, and we both graduated right around May, and that's when, like, shortly after that, that's when everything with George Floyd happened, and it goes on. And he had fully put in applications. We were going to move to Atlanta, and he was going to join like the police force there, and that's what he really wanted to do. And after everything happened, he was like, "There's no way that I, being someone who wants change, like there's no way that I can just do that, And I mean, I don't know if this is something that I can say if we're having an honest conversation. What he had said to me was that after studying this for 4 years, that like one of his professors had told him, being a police officer is almost like being in a gang. And it's like, it's somewhere where you can't ever go against what everyone else is doing, and you can't ever speak up. And so that ultimately made him decide, like, in the climate we're in right now, there's no way that I can be a police officer now. And he was really disappointed because he wanted to make change and he wanted to, be a part of the community. And now he's not doing that anymore. So maybe he can do something later down the line. Now he's going to try to do social work. So maybe he can do that.
Thank you, Keely, for sharing. And I saw that in the chat. I thought it was important for you to share out loud because, it's the idea of one officer. And here we have chiefs and sheriffs. These are leaders. Plus, we also have the National Law Enforcement Officers Memorial Fund and Museum, who, and their constituents are all law enforcement and law enforcement related individuals. And they're going to be watching this recording and have access to this. And we just wanted to share some of these things. Leaders have an opportunity to turn that ship around. I want to give an opportunity to some of the sheriffs and chiefs that have not spoken yet. What are your reactions? If you had any reactions to what you just heard. Sheriff, I want to go over to Sheriff Maddox first.
Thank you. Just really quick. And I hear what you all are saying. You all want integrity. You all want trust. You all want solutions to the problem that exists here. You want the pipeline, the prison. Well, let me just say this. And I hear a lot of you all on here saying that I wanted to be in law enforcement, or my boyfriend wanted to be in law enforcement, but you backed away. But how do you expect the problem to change if you don't become a solution to the problem? And let me tell you what I've done, to even stop, we talking about the solution to the problem as well as the pipeline, the prison thing. So what I've done in my area as the sheriff, I have dropped the age. It used to be that you have to be 20 years old to even apply for a job at the DeKalb County Sheriff's Office. I can't speak for the others, but the DeKalb County Sheriff, you have to be 20 years old. I've dropped that age down to 18. Because I feel like if you get them at a young age, you can groom them and you can train them into the offices that you need them to be. It's a difference between the sheriff's office and the police department. Understand that too. Although we are law enforcement, we have two different roles and responsibilities, and some people have to understand that. You do have some full service sheriff's office that do both. In my agency, we don't. We're responsible for the courts, field jail division. The biggest part is the jail division. So with that said, they get to come in, we give them tuition reimbursement. Should they decide they want to go back to college, they can go to college and get their degree, they can move on, they can get all the training. It's an upward mobility. And when we talk about a job, we don't say a job, we tell them that you come in with a career and we start them on that career path. But also, let me explain something to you. You can send these officers, we can go to every training you want. I have every training there is hostage negotiator, defensive tactics instructor, general instructor, I have it all. But if I don't know how to apply that, it defeats the whole purpose. So it starts at the top. It starts at the top right here at the head. You have to change the hearts, mind, and soul. And I see everybody saying we need to hire sociologists and psychologists. You can train on, but nobody wants to do what we do. When you all are running away from, it is us that are running into to make sure that everybody else is safe. And then guess what? Then we become the psychologists, we become the sociologists, we become the pastor that people want us to pray for them. We become the teacher, we become the mental health advisor. And that's why it goes back to the suicide. So now we're going into the suicide. Just last year alone, we had over 220 something officers to commit suicide because we are dealing with so much. And understand one thing, we need you all just as much as you all need us. And we need to work together. And I have this acronym in my office. It's called every employee in DeKalb County Sheriff's Office. If you call anybody right now and you ask them, what is EAR? They're going to tell you excellence, accountability, and respect. It doesn't mean that we're perfect when we talk about excellence, but we're going to try our best to operate in the excellent character and wear the uniform that we wear. But we also hold ourselves accountable for our actions. If we make a mistake, we're going to say, especially from the sheriff, to say, I apologize, it's a mistake, but let me tell you what we're doing to correct that. but we're also going to respect each other. We have to respect one another before we can go out here and respect everybody else on the streets. We have to respect those inmates. I have 1,500 inmates. We have to respect those inmates with dignity and respect, because those inmates will come out and they become a part of the community. And we talk about that pipeline to prison and given the justice reform, we want to make those inmates better coming out than they did going in. But we have to have conversations. We have to have communication. But we have to understand the roles that we all play. You all have to understand what we have been put out. This is our, yes, it's a job. It's our job, it's our function. That's what we're doing. We have a job to do. We get up every morning. I'm sure I can speak for all these officers. We get up every morning putting this uniform on. I don't think any of us on here look out to say, well, I'm ready to go out to shoot somebody today. I'm ready to go out to fight somebody and choke. No, I can see right now and tell from all of us that are on here in this uniform, we take pride in this uniform. And we want to go out and make sure that you are safe and that nobody bothers you and that your family, your children, your grandchildren. I have grandchildren. My daughter is an educator. So do I have fear? Yes, I have fear. I have fear because of the way the crime is going. I have fear of that. But we have to come together. We can sit here and talk all day long and have these good conversations and it sounds good and be very educated and speak with such big words. But if we do not apply it and we do not hold those leaders responsible for the positions that they hold, such as myself, I'm an elected official. The only people that can take me out of office are the citizens of DeKalb County. They voted me in and they're the only ones that can get me out. 84% came out and said, I want you to be our sheriff. And I take pride with that. And that's why I'm called the community sheriff, because I need to get out there in the community, because once I get out there with you all are going to see me and it's going to be about trust. And you guys are going to say, wow, we're getting there. Yes, because the culture has changed, because it's changed with me. We have crisis intervention training, implicit bias training, verbal judo, you name it, we have it, we get it all. But if it's not applied and you don't change the heart, mind, and soul of that individual that has that training, it's not going to mean anything to us. So it's all about having a passion for what it is that you do, love what you do, and a commitment to the excellence of the job that you are here to do. I love what I do. I've been doing it for over 28 years. I have a passion. I don't see anything else that I could probably want to do. Even after this, I'm at the age where I can retire, but I'm going to do 2 terms prayerfully, because I love what I do, because I see that I'm making an impact. I'm making an impact, not just with the community, but my agency, because once I make the impact with the agency, my employees are going to go out to the community and make an impact with the community. And then that way you all will know that you can trust us. And then I'm going to get with the other leaders that are on this call so that we can come together and see what it is that we can do. Because what works for one community is not going to work for the same, it's for the other community. So we have to see what works for that community. And we can't say, well, I want blacks to come in and patrol the blacks. I don't want the whites to come in. No, you make people treat people how they should be, regardless of their skin color. It's not, as Dr. Martin Luther King said, it's not about their skin color, it's about the context of the character. And let me leave you with this saying. You all came up with the saying, and I know I'm always on my little soapbox here. Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. said it best. Our lives begin to end the day we become silent about the things that matter. And as you can see, I'm not silent about anything. I don't bite my tongue. I tell people, you don't tell me how to run my agency, and you don't talk to my people any kind of way. My employee, I have another employee on the line, and she will tell you up front. I tell them, when you go talk to those inmates, you treat them with dignity and respect. That is not our job to judge them. We are not there to judge. We are there to do a job. And that is for the care, custody, and control of those inmates. But to make sure that they're better going out than what they did coming in. That's why I have Veterans Court, Mental Health Court. I have a welding program where I just graduated 13 inmates. They have 12 or less months on their sentencing, where we transport them on the bus for this program. 13 inmates. This is just one of many pilot programs that we have in place when we talk about justice reform. We got to give those people an opportunity that's never had an opportunity. Then some people say they really need a second chance. Some people never had a first chance. You take away your food, your place to sleep, and an education, where will any of us be to this day? So you think about some of those individuals that are walking the street. When you talk about mental illness, 23% of my population is classified as mentally ill. It's so easy for us as law enforcement officers to go take the mentally ill and throw them in the jail. They need help. What are we doing? So we can have these conversations, but I would ask that you all go out and get with the legislators and tell them, put some money in the mental health facilities. Give these individuals help so they can become the productive citizen that we know they can be. And if you think it's bad now, you wait until this pandemic lifts. We're going to see a whole different realm. And then it's going to be something different from all of us law enforcement. That's my soapbox. I'm sorry. I'm passionate about, as you can see, I'm very passionate about what it is that I do. I love what I do, and I'm committed to what I'm doing. And it's about being excellent. I'm not perfect. I'm not perfect at all. But I guarantee you that I'm going to make sure that when I walk out with this uniform. My employees will tell you, they can probably tell you, I don't even know if they can tell you one time they see me without this uniform, because I take pride. I don't even step on my property without this badge on, because that means something to me. That is why that badge is over our officer's heart, because it protects our heart, because we take pride in this.
Yeah. Sheriff Maddox, thank you. Yes, definitely your passion is there. And I think, one of the things that NMCers, I've talked to several, is that it's so different. And Betsy, you mentioned it, 18,000 police departments, right? Not everybody has these programs that the chiefs and sheriffs on this call are implementing in their departments. But as a profession, they are moving forward. We want them to move forward. And this call is all about having NMCers, the younger generation, weigh in, and for law enforcement on the call, for you to hear what's important to them. And I want to call out one of the NMCers on this call, Julia Hart. She wrote in the chat, Sheriff Maddox. She is someone that's in your community, and she said, I would love to help out in any way I can to help build a relationship between police and my community. Sign me up. She's right there in your DeKalb County area. So we hope that there's a follow-up there after this call. And Betsy, you're in the LA region, and Deputy Chief Dominic Choi is part of the region. Now, I want to go to Deputy Chief Dominic Choi real quick, because you had a question that you wanted to ask these students. We're going to pivot. I think it's an interesting question. That's something that you wanted insight from this generation for. So do you want to fire off your question?
Sure. Thank you very much. So my question to the group is, so some of you are in the media industry or social media industry, or getting there at least. So my question is, how important is it to this generation to fact check what is coming out in the media or social media, or is it even done? And if it is done, how's it done? And I ask that because media nowadays is much different than when I was growing up. It's a newspaper or mainstream news, but now literally as you're standing on the line of a protest, somebody posts something and the entire group understands what they're supposed to do and go, and it's coordinated, and this is all done through social media. So that's just a tactical thing, but as far as general social media, how is that vetted?
Fact checking.
So I received the question. Yeah, so kind of prepare some remarks for it. I guess one of the things that I had, the question that was inspired by your question was, what's the motive behind it being asked? But at face value, of course, it's important for anyone, with no emphasis necessary for college students or young professionals, to ensure that they're acting on accurate information. And additionally, I was kind of wondering, how are we defining the burden of fact-checking media? If I see an article on Twitter that was posted by a syndicated news site like Washington Post, Fox 8 News, MSNBC, what is going to be my incentive to fact check that? If it's a reputable news source, and I'm thinking outside of, policing as a profession, if I see something on Twitter or Facebook about, this is such an old example, but Enron or Amazon or Walmart, and it's been posted by, the New York Times, where they have professionals who vetted this information, they've placed it together. It's kind of like, if it's a reputable news source and there has undeniably been a cultural shift where we have these longstanding publications that 10 years ago weren't going to cover a protest, they weren't going to cover Black Lives Matter or anything, but now it's getting coverage on national news days on end, then it kind of shifts like, oh, is this just a video on social? No, it's not just a video on social media. It's a video that was posted by a syndicated national news network on social media that's telling this narrative. And then if I take that into account, I think another part of it was how common, and I think it's very common for people to fact check the information that they're using, because we're in an age now where if I have an iPhone, which is totaling up to 120 million people in America alone, I'm getting Apple News reports that are saying this. Or I'm getting reports from other national news networks that I'm following off of social media or because I have an app. So I think there's this misconception that everything that we're saying, everything we're doing is coming off of some nameless, blameless, fuzzy video that somebody posted on social media. And that's just not the case. And it invalidates social media activists. It invalidates people who are gathering that primary information that's then converted into syndicated secondary information, because one of the tools that we used to prepare for a conversation was a New York Times Post article that pieced together what happened at the Capitol riots through social media posting. So it's kind of like, when you think about it that way, I think that question kind of moves towards invalidating the conversation by saying, well, that's not real news, or you're not getting your facts right. But it's like, no, it's pretty factual. Like, people aren't just out here doing what they're doing off of grainy video footage anymore. Like, it's live time. And then we're piecing together the story through the same things that anybody uses to piece together media and news and how they report the news, whether it's on Twitter or it's on Fox 8 News at 8 o'clock at night. So I don't know. I think that's where, when we get that question, and we've gotten that question from law enforcement a couple of times. So I think that's also kind of striking a suspicious nerve, because it's kind of like, what is the value of this question? I think one of the episodes, the guy was like, we have all this rhetoric, but what's the purpose behind our rhetoric? What's the purpose behind the rhetoric about fact checking on social media? And then I think for me, how can videos be taken out of context as much as it's kind of being perpetrated that it is? Like, for me, it's just like, if I see a video, it's not doctored, it's raw video footage, and you see something wrong happen on the video. How many other sources do I need to go find to say whether or not what happened on that video was wrong? Do I need to go find a different angle? Do I need to go, like, what? So I guess, like, what is this burden of fact checking that's coming out of social media reporting or news reporting in general? Because it's all basically becoming the same thing, with all of it being used by, again, syndicated, national, reputable, trusted news outlets.
I'd like to just make a quick response, if it's okay. So I asked that question based on personal experience, and I've provided interviews, I've talked to major news networks, and I will tell you from personal experience that the editor can make my statement whatever that editor wants it to be. Also with video, every time LAPD has a critical incident that occurs, whether it's an officer-involved shooting or an application of force where there's severe injury, we take all of our officers' body-worn video, and then we put it out within 45 days to the community publicly, so they can see for themselves what happened. But also, unless you have the story before and the story after, and even the story during, the context that the video shows may not be completely the right, well, I won't say perception, but may paint the wrong picture based on the whole investigation. So I would say everyone's allowed to believe what they believe when they see it, but there's context that needs to be put in video. And also there's a way editors can skew stories based on what the intent was behind the person being interviewed or talked to. That's why I'm just, and again, I don't know how you would fact check, the statement. I'm just, is there an effort to do that? That's my question. And I'm asking it based on personal experience. That's where it's coming from.
Yeah, and I appreciate that. And I thank you for sharing that, because I thought about that too. I'm not at all saying that. I think on our last call, we had a Minnesota deputy explain how there was one video where they completely tilted on its head. But I think it kind of goes back into, for me, thinking on an academic standpoint, you have a teacher that's concerned with cheating. Cheating happens, but then you look at the amount of effort a teacher puts into, quote unquote, preventing cheating, and you think to yourself, well, do they have any evidence, or do they have any wherewithal to prove that the effort that they're putting into questioning and preventing cheating is justified based on who's actually cheating. So I think that's where I get with the social media conversation. It's always a question, it's a constant question, but do we have enough wherewithal? Do we have enough evidence? Do we have enough inclination to feel like so much of this footage is being doctored to where we're like, oh, this has to be like a huge issue with what's going on in this conversation we're having. And then my other thing with that is, I feel like that process should just 45 days to release footage. In this digital age and how we are moving as a society, that's entirely too long. It's just too long. And I think that goes back into going back into your processes and looking at how can we get this out to the public faster so we don't look like we're doctoring or we're holding or we're withholding, because you're taking 45 days, the general public's taking 5 minutes. And that's just the reality.
That's a really good point, Maya. Speed, the information is traveling at almost the speed of light these days with social media, right? Yeah, I want to shift gears for a second. We are over our allotted time, as you saw in the chat. But if you'd like to stay, I think a lot of people would like to stay in this conversation. We will keep the room open to keep the conversation going if you'd like to stay. I know that Chief Shoemaker, you may have to leave soon. We've got something else. But Chief Irwin, over in Pell City, you had a question for the group. I think it's a good one if you'd like to share it and get.
Yes. And the things that I'm always trying to do is I'm always trying to come up with things that we can do inside the community that would build relationships, because relationships is key in law enforcement, having a relationship with the community so they can talk about it and someone can report. Like if an incident such as what she was just talking about, if someone's involved and there's a video of it, that law enforcement need to step up and do something about it if there's a video. And you know, anytime someone reports something to me that could have occurred on video, we always go back and review it immediately. So, you know, us as leaders, we need to keep officers accountable if something like that reported. But my question is, what programs would this generation recommend that law enforcement develop and implement to have better relationships with their generations and future generations?
Anybody want to take that on?
Yeah, so I can chime in here. I'd say a program I think would be really beneficial, I was going to touch on this later, would be something called the STAR program. It's called Support Team Assistant Pilot Program, which was actually started in Denver, Colorado last June. And basically what it is, it's a person-centric mobile crisis response team for community members who are expecting problems related to mental health, depression, poverty, homelessness, or substance abuse. Chief Dominic Choi touched on it earlier, talking about how he had that implemented within his department, and the intent of STAR was really just to send the right response. It's not something that's one size fits all, because you know people call 911 for an array of reasons, and it's not always something that involves a risk or criminal intent. So I believe like over the first 6 months, Denver received more than 2,500 emergency calls that fell into the STAR program's purview. And the STAR program was able to close in on 748 of them. And none of those calls required police, and no one was arrested. So I think that by implementing programs like that truly address mental health, because I think that's something that is so important, especially within our generation, it will really help address those issues, and just really that I think that importance of that would greatly improve things.
Thank you, Hassan. Anne?
This is more of a personal thing, but living in a big city, the police are rather a nameless community to me. I can't think beyond, I had a friend whose dad was a police officer. Of any police officers I know personally, most of my interactions are, I drive by them when they're pulling somebody over. And I think it would help build trust in my community to actually know, I'll have an idea of the police officers who would be responding if I had to call 911. Because right now in Louisville, if I got into a car crash with a person of color, I'd be very hesitant to call the police, because I wouldn't know who was responding, what biases they would have, what danger it might create in the situation. But actually meeting some of the police officers who work in my very specific area might make a huge difference in at least giving me an idea of who's going to respond, and might help build trust.
Absolutely. And, you know, that's the thing about it is what officers need to do is beat management. I'm sure all the other law enforcement in here know about that. And that's something that's been in law enforcement for many years. And that's where officers are assigned to a certain area and they get out of their vehicles and they walk around and they communicate with people. And sometimes officers may not do that, but that's one thing that's really important, especially in a bigger cities than mine, is that officers are very accessible to the community and getting to know them so they have relationships.
Thank you.
I want to just, if I could comment on that a little bit, because I totally agree with the chief and the premise of the question. And I think that in policing, we want to do more of that. I believe in the notion that people want to get to know their police officers and their deputies, not when they need them, but when they don't need them. And I think that one of the challenges, and especially one of the things that we sometimes run into, is there's sometimes a call to say, well, we need less cops. Well, then how can we go and engage with the community? Because in my county, we're the largest in the state of Texas. And I'm very hands-on sheriff. I'm always out there in the field, and it's call after call after call after call that they're responding to. Even if they wanted to go out there and engage more, it's just a time issue. They just can't. And you know, the other thing that I hope that at some point, and maybe in a future conversation we could speak about, is I'd love to get your thoughts as well, because I know that there's some brilliant discussion going on about different response models. And like I put in one of my comments, look, law enforcement is in the front lines of 3 key issues in this country: mental illness, addiction, and poverty. We're not going to incarcerate our way out of these issues. We need public health, community-based responses for that. We didn't decide and say, hey, send us all that. We got it by default. So are you holding your mayors and council members accountable for that? You know, call them out on that. Don't elect them. Those are electable positions. That's where resources should be going. And then beyond that, we have to do something about mass incarceration. You know, that's also not the answer. Those are issues that need to be addressed. I know we talk about what's on videos, and look, we wear that uniform, as the sheriff stated, in DeKalb County. So we're what's caught on camera, but what's behind in the kitchen, if you will, where the cooking's happening, you know, what's happening over there? Because there's a lot of other sectors that need change. I'm the only law enforcement executive in my region that testified against the unconstitutional cash bail system that exists. You know, we need more law enforcement leaders doing that. You know, and we also need to have a discussion not only about what we get wrong, but the many things that go right, the millions of interactions that were positive, that were de-escalated, that co-response models that were used. And also, I encourage you also that I'm, as visionary and aspirational thinker, I'm a half glass full kind of guy that you could ever find. I'm a very pro-reform person. I walk our jails. I do my best to engage with our clients that are incarcerated. I can tell you 36% have a mental health issue. 9% are self-identified as being homeless. I know our population. 50% are African-American here in Harris County. 25% are Latino. You could bank on that every month. It's going to be consistent. You know, no one's talking about some of those things. I'm not saying nobody, but what I'm saying is these are broad, complex social issues that we have to deal with. And we also need to be talking about crime as well. We need you to also speak up to say there are bad actors out there. We can't only be aspirational and say everybody's going to be saved. Everyone's going to be helped. Everybody, we can use the soft approach. Unfortunately, it doesn't work that way sometimes. The real world isn't always pleasant. It's not always going to be where let's just talk them out of a crisis. There's going to be very dangerous situations with people that are out there to harm others. And if not for law enforcement out there, it would be a very dangerous situation. So yes, on one hand, we could do so much more. We need to step up and be part of the solution. But we can't also be naive that everybody's going to be helped by simply sending a social worker and a counselor. And we get pointed the finger because we didn't handle something right. Well, where was the family dealing with that addiction for all those years? Where was the family dealing with that mental health crisis so that police wouldn't have to respond? You know, did they access those services? Good luck trying to get those services out in the community. And why aren't you calling out the elected officials that make those decisions? You know, all these things need to be tackled, not just, well, law enforcement, you're not doing the right thing. I agree with Maya. We should hire more social workers and I'm all for that. But the more we hire that, it gets back to my question, then who's going to address violent crime in our communities? Who's going to address gun violence? Because I wish we could help everyone, but we're not there yet. And there's always going to be someone that's going to be looking to victimize and take advantage of others. And we also have to answer the survivors of crime, because sometimes that's not part of the discussion. We deal a lot with the offender, and I'm all for it. And I've got receipts to show what I do for offenders. And I've got the marks to show for it, because I go out of my way to make sure that we're helping to X the box, not be judgmental. I tell them some folks need second, third, 4, 5 chances. I've put my political career on the line testifying on behalf of Cash Bail, but testifying against Cash Bail, I'm sorry. But at the same time, we need to make sure that we're also looking out for the victims of crime. And many times it's in our marginalized communities as well, where the gangs are taking place and drug activities running rampant. And look, we need to reform our antiquated war on drugs. I'm all for that as well. So what I'm saying is it's a complex issues that we just need to keep tackling, because we're not going to solve it, unfortunately, in one webinar or something. We're going to have to put in the work and get this done and elect sheriffs and make sure that good chiefs are being appointed. You're singing to the choir here. We get it. Get the ones that don't understand, and elect them out, and elect the sheriffs that are out, but support the ones that are getting the work done.
Thank you.
I'm ending there.
Thank you, Sheriff Gonzalez. So everyone, we want to hear from Chief Balling from Ohio, and then we're going to turn it over to Hassan. Chief Balling, your reactions.
Well, first and foremost, thank you to everybody that's been here. This has been a great conversation. A long time ago, I was taught by two very wise people certain things. One is God gave us 2 ears. That's why I've been trying to be quiet, and I wanted to listen to you, because what you say actually matters. And not only did I want to listen to you, I want to try to understand where you're coming from. And that's the only way we grow from this. As chief and leaders in our community, which we both are, not just the sheriffs and chiefs on the call, but every one of us on the call, we're the leaders and we're going to be making a difference. I wanted to understand your points. I want to understand your view, because that's how we really make a change. As Clayton said in the very beginning, we also have to surround people with opposite points of view. We have to have people that are willing to challenge us. As a chief, I hire people below me and have at my next rank, people that are willing to challenge me and call me out when I'm doing something wrong. So I really do appreciate this group. Law enforcement's at a drastic stage. We're at a time that some people say we have a lot of obstacles ahead of us. And I don't see that. I see these as opportunities ahead of us. I don't see police reform. I see police improvement. And the only way we make this change is to work together. I serve with the National Law Enforcement Museum, and I put on presentations. I put on presentations for valor across the United States. Officers are losing their lives. 21 years less average lifespan. Suicide was the #1 killer of officers last year, excluding COVID. Heart attacks was #2, then traffic, and then assaults on officers. So we are facing a critical junction. We need to get good quality people, as we have already talked about several times, and it's getting harder and harder. But I caution you to listen to the people in the field. Every time you put a barrier of saying we need people with 4-year degrees, or we need to make sure we live in the community or represent the community, let's make sure we're not excluding the people that we're trying to get into law enforcement. Let's make sure that we're not excluding the counselors or the people that live in maybe minority communities that want to work in other areas, because I want to hire them too. So we have to learn to listen and understand each point of view. And then the last thing I'm going to say is we have to take action. This is a great event tonight, and I hope I can follow up with many of you throughout. Hopefully I can become part of the change, and hopefully I can be one of the leaders that you're looking for all of us to be, with you by our side and with you helping us make these changes, because that is what law enforcement needs. We need to have these conversations, not as a social media piece, but as real life substance changes. So as my end point is, thank you for letting me listen to you, help me understand, and let us grow together. So thank you for everybody tonight.
Thank you, Chief. You know, a lot of the chiefs had to log on because they had other commitments, understandably, but the good thing is this meeting is being recorded, plus we're going to be putting together a recap. So for those that are remaining on the call, I don't know if Chief Balling, you can stay, but Hassan it has some final thoughts regarding some listing out the priorities and recommendations of this generation.
Yeah, thank you for that, Lawrence. So before we wrap up, I do just want to recap some things I heard from the group today and what I have personally learned from NMCers prior to our meeting, just through social media and through various conversations. Some of these things you've probably heard before. We touched on all of them today, and I really just want to make sure that this is on everyone's radar. So the first thing is just really creating strong relationships of mutual trust between police agencies and the communities that they serve, because that's so critical to maintaining public safety and effective policing. We heard this earlier in the conversation and so much today. Police should be an extension of their community rather than a separate entity. Right now, in many of the problematic areas, there's this distinct us versus them mentality surrounding people and the police from both sides, and that needs to be healed, especially if we want to effectively support and police an area. Our second recommendation is transparency. Xavier touched on this earlier. Transparency is essential to positive police community relationships. When a critical incident occurs, agencies should try to release as much information about it as possible. I'm sorry, but 45 days is just too long because information spreads too quickly now. At the same time, it's also important to stress that the first information to emerge following any critical incident is prior to change. Police should let leaders know that the news media and the public that information might not be correct, and any misinformation should be corrected as quickly as possible. And lastly, just sending mental health professionals rather than police. I touched on this earlier about the STAR program that's happening within Denver. I highly recommend you look into that if you haven't heard of it. But we can truly help people because not everything is really crime related. We can help people. So these are just some of the recommendations that NMC recommends, and I'm really glad on how this conversation went today. And I'll hand it off back to you, Florence.
Okay, thank you, Hassan. Before we close out, NMCers, any thoughts from especially those we have not heard from yet? And I know we're running low on time, but this is, again, we want to take advantage of the opportunity here. So any of your thoughts and insights you'd like law enforcement to hear or know?
I can chime in. So I can see there are some interest from the chief and the sheriffs of how to connect with our young generation and the younger generation. And what I think will be helpful is having the activities or in the community that allows interpersonal interactions between the young generation and the police, because I believe those interpersonal interactions are very important in like building relationships. So for example, like one issue that I heard Chief Gonzalez mention that police face like dealing with is poverty. So what if there is some volunteering programs that allow like young generation to contribute to the cause that bigger themselves, and have the police helping out, for example, like food station or something for homeless people, kind of like distributing those, and have the young generation work along with the police. I think that is one of the way to really increase the positive image in the community, as well as allow the young generation to contribute to what is bigger in themselves, because I think that is what we aim right now. It's to make change, to contribute to the cause that bigger ourselves.
Chai, I want to kind of jump in real quick. As we're dwindling down, maybe I'll talk a little more if Florence doesn't pull me on mute. We had officers tonight do a program called Cooking with Cops. And it may seem like a simple program, but we took kids, at-risk kids from middle schools and high schools, and we just teach them how to cook. and we sit down around a family table with officers and the kids and have dinner with them and then send them food home, because a lot of them don't have that. So starting on these programs, like you mentioned, it makes more valuable contacts and builds that tradition and helps me get officers, quite frankly, down the road, because we're breaking down those walls. So I think you really hit it on the head with that.
All right. Thank you, Chi, and thank you, Chief. NMCers, before we sign off, anything else from a priority standpoint that we have not talked about, or something that we've talked about that you want to reiterate to the law enforcement officials?
Real quick, Florence. Thank you guys, all the law enforcement, for being here, and all the different actors. Just let us, one thing I would say is, you know, you're out there doing the good work, and honestly, you guys are all, because you're here participating. Let us see you for sure. Get in contact with us. Do whatever you can to let us know, because I know personally, I see, you know, the bad stuff a lot of times gets the limelight, but we definitely appreciate all you guys. And the more we see you, I mean, the more our relationship is gonna flourish, and the more change we can impact in a positive way. So just do as much, you know, spotlighting yourself as you can, and we're definitely gonna appreciate that.
Yeah. I think Chief Shoemaker said, or was it Shoemaker said earlier in the chat, that law enforcement doesn't do a good job telling their own story. And so a lot of the good programs and the efforts that are being made in the profession don't get the visibility. So people may think it's not happening. But forums like this will bring to light, oh, this program is happening, that program is happening. But we also want to talk about what else needs to happen. Because again, not all police departments are offering these initiatives and programs. Not all police departments adopt the community policing model. So NMCers, any other thoughts you have, you know, anything that's important to you that you want to make sure law enforcement hears?
We don't hate you guys. We really do want the police to be a part of the conversation. I know how I look right now. Black power, daishiki. I know what that looks like. At the same time, I understand that it takes us to reach across the table and for us to meet at the middle to create a change. Not the Gen Z and national millennial community aren't a fan of racism. We're not a fan of unequal oppression. We're not a fan of lack of accountability. Those are the things that we're not a fan of, and they just happen to be associated with the police in recent times. We want our communities to be safe. We want to have safe communities for all of us. We just also want to make sure that we can trust the people who are trying to keep us safe. And ultimately, this is the first step that will take. It's going to have to go 50 different ways, because it's 50 different states and there's counties, and I'm not even going to go into all of that. But the biggest thing is that we do not hate the police. We want to make sure that we all have a safe place and we can really be proud of our country and proud of the system that's supposed to police us or keep us safe. And that's the biggest takeaway we want to get out there. Of course, you know, people have a skew of how much they like the police or don't like the police, but we ultimately want to make our place safer. And we believe you guys do too. We just got to learn how to speak the same language. That's it.
Thank you, Xavier, for that. Yeah. And I'll pause to see if there are any other NMCers who want to weigh in. No. Okay. Well, it's been 2 hours, everyone. Thank you for spending your time with us this evening, right? It's nighttime for you all on the East Coast. But where do we go from here? We want everyone to know, you know, and for the law enforcement officials that are watching the recording of this meeting, if you want to visit the YouTube channel, it'll be at the end of this video. But these NMCers put a lot of work into interviewing about 25 different public safety stakeholders, from activists to community advocacy organizations, to researchers, to law enforcement officials, to social scientists, academics, et cetera, just to get the various perspectives on these issues. You heard from everyone, these issues are complex. And change is not going to happen overnight. However, these conversations here is a start. I think for some of the NMCers, maybe you've never talked to law enforcement before. So this is a new experience. For the law enforcement officials in this meeting, maybe you haven't had the diversity of young people from all across the country to talk to. Hopefully this was a valuable, value-added, and insightful conversation, but where do we go from here? This is a national conversation, but the next step is we are going to be working with the NMCers to issue a local engagement toolkit to encourage every single person on this call who is involved in the project to activate in their own communities, get engaged, right? Let's not take the foot off the gas pedal, but everyone has a lot of different things swirling through their heads probably, but we want you all to remain engaged in your own cities because change happens at the local level. So look out for that. NMCers will be invited to another meeting where we can release that and talk about how you can continue getting engaged in your own communities. We need your voices out there. And so with that, I'll pause one more second for any other final thoughts. Feel free to unmute yourself. Go for it.
Hey guys, it's Jazz. I know I'm not supposed to speak. I am with Sheriff Marion Brown's office. I really would love to commend you all for being young and outspoken. I am 29 and I came to the Sheriff's Department in entertainment and public relations. I just want you guys to know your voices are needed in the areas that you may not think you want to go in. I never thought I was going to leave movie sets. I never thought I was going to leave very high-strung, really cool projects until I had to work on a project with Alton Sterling's family, and that changed my perspective. Then I had to work with Brian Stevenson, and that changed my perspective. And it made me realize I needed to do a lot of different work. So I want to challenge you all to go join the platforms that you're critiquing, because it will help you not only evoke change, but it will also teach you how to navigate in several different cultures in government. Government is slow, guys. I didn't even know it was that slow. I mean, they had to tell me every day for 6 months, Jasmine, it's slow. And I had to say, okay. And I've been able to implement change here, guys. So I want to encourage you all to go join the areas that you don't want to, because I did it. And when I tell you, it's teaching me a lot, but it's also helping me be able to say in a board meeting, that doesn't sound like a good idea for anybody under the age of 30. You know, those are things that you just be strong in your positioning and go do it. That's it. Okay, bye.
Thank you, Jazz. Okay, if there are no other comments, feel free to interrupt me before we sign off. But if there are no other comments from the group, then I want to say thank you. Thank you, NMC, for being so involved and engaged in this project. Haley Hassan for working hard on putting this meeting together and for moderating our segments. And to the chiefs for investing your time in listening, and to the younger generation, and we will follow up. And guess what? We're going to send your emails to the NMCers, so I'm sure they will follow up with you as well and share their personal thoughts with you directly. So again, thank you everyone for your time. Let's go out and continue to get engaged and stay engaged in order for change to happen. So with that, have a good night, everyone.